Hello everyone, welcome to our new series called What Would Chobra Do? That's me, Chobra. You're watching my channel right now. In case you missed it, I'll leave the link down below on the updates that I had for what's going to be happening for Champions Seoul, and this is going to be that series where we focus on emulating what it's like to be some of the teams that are entering Champions Seoul and trying to adjust from match to match to make sure they have the winning strategy to, of course, eventually lift the Champions Trophy. Now, we are only going to focus on the Pacific teams, so, there might be a little bit of bias here and there, but of course, at the end of the day, we're actually going to try to get as objective as possible because we want to see if we have the right reads on all the opponents that the Pacific teams will face. Let's jump right into it with our first team, Gen G. So here is Gen G's roster. We have our coaching staff, head coach Solo and HSK, the cute Korean bromance. They're always getting so nervous and anxious in the coaching booth. But here is your star-studded Korean lineup. Texture, the main duelist Munchkin, the Flash and Flex, and of course the IGL. That's what the star denotes. Charon, who is primary controller. All he does is play smokes. You got Lakia. All he does is play Initiator. And Meteor, mostly Sentinel. He plays some double duelist now and then, but in the current map pool, we haven't really seen it resurface. So there it is. Now for some of these notations, the bang here is the X factor. Like, this is the guy that's going to turn the game around. This is the guy that you don't want him to get warmed up if you're the opponents, right? You don't want to give him that chance. Like, these are the guys who are game changers. Now the border here, the green border, is just my go-to player to watch. Now this was tough for Gen G because this could be any of them, like any of them. And namely, I want to give a shout out to Lakia as well, because a lot of us, including myself, said he was looking like the weakest link on this team at the beginning of the year. And he kind of was in the very beginning, but now he's not. He's definitely not. And boy, is he responsible for so many things, so many games, so many rounds, so many maps. So the player to watch on Gen G, quite frankly, you can pick any one of them. But the reason I pick Charon is just because of the way he plays individually, like his individual mechanics are very fun to watch, but he's also smart, and then he's a rookie. So there's this extra storyline, right? So to be against Charon, Meteor gets an honorable mention just because I still think he's one of the core parts that makes Gen G work. But Charon's your guy to watch. He's also pretty funny. The overall story for Gen G is that they started as a roster of last chances. So these were a bunch, other than Charon, right? The rest of the players and the coaching staff had all been around for quite some time, whether it's in Valorant or even previously on different games. And they all had very, very high moments, but not quite enough to basically be the protagonist, right? Whether it's of Korea, whether it's of the world, whatever it might be. So this is a quick summary introducing Gen G in case you haven't been following their story. But to me, to kind of tie this whole year together, they were the roster of last chances when they formed. I looked at this team, I looked at these players, and I said, okay, these are all players who had some very high moments, and all players who had proven their individual worth, but they never quite got there often enough or high enough to become the main character, to become the protagonist. And to me, because all of them, other than Charon, had been around the scene since the beginning, to me it was like, okay, if you can't make it work with this combination of roster, I mean, that might be your last chance, right? Because then people are going to be scratching their head of like, I don't know what it is, but these guys just can't do it. They can't break through. So it was kind of a make it or break it deal. And they made it. I mean, they made it. They made every grand finals possible. 5 back-to-back grand finals. 5 back-to-back grand finals. That means Charon, the rookie, has always played a minimum of best of 5, one best of 5 in every tournament he's played in every playoffs he's entered. Which is crazy. There's tons of people in VCT that haven't played a BO5 on a big stage. So just an impressive run from this team. And whatever it was, like, apparently this was the winning recipe. Like, this combination. Bringing home the first trophy from Master Shanghai for Pacific and Korea. Now going for the Triple Crown, right? They won Pacific the overall year. And then they won Master Shanghai. So they won a Masters tournament. And now they're looking to try to win Champions Seoul. That would be a record. That would be a first. That'd be very, very impressive. And so, I mean, just what a run. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if they win Champions, like, there's no dispute. Like, they are going down in the history books for sure. Now, where does that strength come from? Well, these are the stats. Obviously, you can dig into it more if you want. Most of this is available online. Some of it is kind of tweaked on my own. I just want you to note, disclaimer, this overall is just for the maps in the current map pool, but obviously the whole year included other maps like Split and Breeze. So there's going to be some wonkiness going on here. But at the end of the day, these guys are never dropping below 50. I mean, okay, on the attacking side of Icebox and the defending side of Sunset, oh, woe is me, they dropped below 50. But most of the other times, I mean, overall average, they're 55%. I would say that's pretty strong, right, on attack and defense, no matter the map, right? Most of the times, you're heavily over 50%, very clearly, right? 55, 57, 60%. And then you have two maps where your win rate is near 80%, 75%, and you've played them so many times. So this has always been one of the strengths that a lot of people said was on Gen G's side, is that their map pool is really deep. You have two maps that feel like must bans for your opponents. You're still very heavy favorites on two more maps. And then the other two maps, you still get by. So there's no permaban. It's just a preference for Gen G at this point. I mean, they have so many ways they can go about this. Now, clearly they have maps they don't like playing, like Bind 17 bans for the whole year, Sunset 18 bans, being banned out a lot more towards the end again. And maybe they're tweaking their composition. Who knows? Most recently, they've been kind of sticking to the Ascent comp. It's had some issues, so we'll have to wait and see. So while they have very, very clear preferences, they're just dominant. They're just dominant. And I think a big part of that is the fact that they don't change compositions. We talked about this in the finals weekend in Pacific, but there's not much of a variation. Only two maps in the current map pool have two different compositions. And even then, it's not huge. In fact, you could probably cross this one out because this seemed like it was just a brief experiment with a no duelist composition on Icebox, and then they immediately got rid of it. So you could even take that out. And then it's just Sunset. You know, they were playing the Rays before. Now they're playing the Jet. Otherwise, they stick with it. You know, the Haven double controller maybe seems a little outdated. They don't think so. They're still sticking with it, right? I mean, Lotus, there's been no reason to change it. Ascent, obviously, no reason to change it for anybody. And then Bind, since the Sky Nurse, you could argue, is a little rough, but they still stick with it. And that means that they've only used half of the agents in the overall agent pool in Valorant. And they're so dominant. I mean, let's talk about some notable agents that they haven't picked up, right? Neon. We haven't seen that come out. Even the Breach is starting to come out more, especially alongside the Neon. Haven't seen that show up from people. You know, there hasn't even been any like testing with the ISO and the Clove on the stage. I would say these two we can still see show up. And we're not seeing that. I mean, the Deadlock too, it's starting to gain a lot more traction. We're not seeing any of those. And then let alone some of the other flavor choices that some teams have or some styles have. So they're just saying, I mean, we've even heard Gen G kind of openly say regarding the Neon of, well, we think Neon's strong. We don't feel the need to play it. We just need to know how to play against it. Again, that seems to be their motto of let's get as comfortable in our own skin so we know how to, so now we can just focus on the opponents, pick them apart rather than trying to play our game to its fullest, because our game's already done, right? It's already a complete package. Everyone on this team knows exactly what each other can do. And that is one of their biggest pros, I would say, right? Is that leads to the excellent mid rounding, that leads to the excellent map control, that leads to them being able to be very flexible amongst their 1-4 defaults, because again, they know each other's limit very well. They're favoring formats or compositions, I should say, where they can really cycle through their utility to take spaces. And how they remedy the gaps in the timer is then they take contact. So it's like, okay, you cleared this area, now we take contact and we keep hold of it, right? You sent in a recon bolt. All right, now we take it. We peek out again. If there's no one there, now we hold here. Or let's say you got some information earlier, but there's no one there. Now we have 1-4 defaults, right? So let's say this side is the 4. All right, we're pushing out. We're going to tighten the map. It's things like this. And then they always have a sentinel. That way they can still have the sentinel watching like 2 places at once with their utility. It's things like this that allows them to keep the same compositions and start to break apart the map and their opponents. And I think that's a huge deal for them. Now, obviously, it helps that everybody can clutch and all of them are crazy, crazy good just at the game. That helps a lot. That helps a lot. But I would say that's, you know, the fact that they're not switching things around a lot Probably helps them a ton. Now, are there weaknesses for them? Well, I mean, there being lots of tape isn't necessarily a weakness, but there is a lot of tape. So you can definitely read into the tendencies a bit and try to push them to the very edge. And because of the way they do map control in 1.4 defaults, right, because of the way that they kind of stack, then take contact, then take places on the map, and then rotate back, they do have a tendency to over-rotate just a tad bit, right? Not like blindly, but just a tad bit. And we've seen this in the earlier parts of the year at international tournaments where you can try to force that out of them and then find a timing to catch them off guard. And then because their whole philosophy is, you hold the default, then you use util, then you take contact, right? Or vice versa. And then you keep hold of the area and you wait for contact. It does rely on the firepower. So sometimes Gen G starts a little slow. Sometimes some of the individuals need a little bit more warm up, and things can get a bit dicey. But also at the end of the day, everyone's going to be great aimers anyway at the top level, so you probably just have to deal with this. And then I guess worst case, some compositions are a little bit outdated, you could argue. But I mean, that is a weakness, but I think they have ways to remedy that. If you couldn't tell, Gen G doesn't have a clear weakness.
Just want to take this chance, by the way, to remind you that if you are enjoying any part of this video, I would very, very much appreciate a like and a comment down below, just to make sure that it helps get it into the system of the algorithm here on YouTube. And also, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because we have more in this series coming up throughout the whole month of August.
Next up is DRX. You have the same coaching staff that's been around for a long time, but the players have changed quite a bit. Nobody from the original Vision Striker roster remains on the playing roster, and Buzz and Mako are the only ones from the very end of the Vision Strikers into DRX era. And now Mako's the IGL. So in case you haven't really been following the news, a lot of things have changed. DRX is a very different team, but we'll get to their playstyle in just a bit. Buzz, your primary duelist. Obviously, he was playing Sentinel a little bit last year, but now he's back on the duelist. That's all he does. He goes in, he dives in, he creates space, he gets kills. Bane used to be one of the OG trainees for DRX. He's been called up, and he had some brief flexing around a little bit, but it seems like now his role will be the primary initiator, right? So he's playing the things like the Sovas, the Fades, and if you're playing, single initiator like this guy, he's the guy that's playing that. And then you got Mako. They tried him on the Breach. Tried to make sure they could figure out the comfort zone for each other. Didn't quite work out. He's now the IGL. You want to give him a comfort position, so he's staying on the smokes. Things haven't changed. And then Foxy9, he had a great stint as the Sentinel for quite some time during Stage 1 for DRX, and he looked great on it. But since then, he has now gone back to being the Flash Initiator / Flex. He plays the Brimstone on the bind, things like that. And he's looked a lot better. He's looked a lot more comfortable on all those agents. So huge props to him for doing what it takes to make sure the team can work well together and that people have their comfort roles. And again, a big part of that was Flashback returning to the roster. And, they tried to put him on a couple other things. He was playing the Clove a little bit, but obviously his biggest comfort zone is the Sentinel. And so they give him the Sentinel role, which puts Foxy9 on other roles, but Flashback's a great Sentinel, so it all works out. Now, Buzz is going to be my guy. He's going to be the guy I'm highlighting here. I didn't want to double up, but on this roster, I have to, because first of all, he's just the guy to watch. He's making things happen just in general for DRX, but also if push comes to shove, this is the guy that's bailing them out. He's already saved them in so many games throughout VCT Pacific this year. And he not only creates space, but then he'll get kills. So, I think he knows just when to play for the team, when to be willing to sacrifice yourself just to create space, etc. And then when to be nope, Buzz Go Kill has to get activated. Very, very fun player to watch. And you can just feel the passion and desperation and determination oozing out of his gameplay. Now, DRX, the story can go a very long way because obviously they're a very, very, storied team in Valorant. But at the end of the day, this is a new DRX. It's 2.0, right? It's a completely new look. But now with Mako IGLing, getting a bit more comfortable. I'm not going to say that he's fully comfy, but getting a bit more accustomed, I should say, to the IGLing. Foxy9 getting a bit more comfortable with the flexing, things like that. You're starting to see moments of the old DRX. You're starting to see the set plays come in. You're starting to see the round layers to the set plays and things like that. And you're starting to see a bit of the prep come in as well, a little bit of the anti-stratting. And then the spacing, the trading, things like that. And that's good news. We can talk more about the pros and cons of that, though, later on. And the important part is you're making this work with a bunch of rookies coming up. And even the veterans, the veterans, right, Buzz and Mako, they're also very young. This is the youngest roster that we have in VCT worldwide. So it's a very insane storyline if they can actually make a run here, because I think, for me, they've already surpassed all my expectations. And now for the Legacy, DRX alongside Fnatic and Crew, the only now remaining 3 teams in the world that have qualified for every Champions. I'm curious which one's going to be the last one, right? Because at some point, surely, at some point, we only have one or none. As always, the asterisk means that this was with other rosters, but overall, DRX as a brand, very, very successful. Now let's look at the overall stats and compositions. I think part of this is because of the way they were like calling up some of the trainees and having some roster changes, things like that throughout the year. So don't read into this too much. The ones where I have the smaller agents next to them is just that, this is kind of a swap in, swap out type of situation. But clearly they experimented a bit, and I assume most of these, if you dig into it, is because like Foxy was playing Sentinel and now he's the one who's flexing. So you kind of have to change like which agent he's flexing to and things like that. But overall, nothing too crazy. Haven just comes back into the map pool. They still already played it 5 times, and they're looking dominant on it, 80%. I'm actually kind of surprised that it's so high. I'm surprised that they're dominating so much on it. But it's looking great, right? The set plays are looking solid. So that's good news for them. Otherwise, I mean, nothing to really write home about, right? I mean, they were willing to play the Abyss, which I think is good, because DRX used to think that they would have the smartest things cooked up in scrims whenever a new map comes out, and then they get to an international stage, and it turns out it's not true. So I'm glad they experimented. It was just the Ascent comp, so do they stick with it or not? We'll have to wait and see, but at least they got some reps on it. But then here comes some of the bigger changes. So now these are some notable numbers on both sides. Icebox looking very good for them as well, and I think a big part of this is like Buzz just pops off whenever they go to Icebox, so that's great for them. 70% win rate on attack, by the way. Like, their defense is fairly weak, 38%, but 70% on attack. That's crazy. But meanwhile, the Lotus and Sunset not looking too good. Now, most recently, they brought in the Neon, so that should be noted. We'll see if it grows into it. I like that. I like that they're bringing the Neon on the Breach, and Buzz's Neon looks fine. So I'm curious to see if that'll change the future of these maps. Now, the thing about the Lotus is they've been banning it a lot too. I mean, the Sunset as well, but 9 bans for the whole year for Lotus. So they knew that they weren't very happy with their Lotus. It's very clear. This is not a map they enjoy leaving on the map pool. And we'll see. Does the Neon and Breach kind of give them new confidence? And to me, the big thing I'm keeping my eye on is, does that make the IGLing easier for Mako? I've noticed this trend for DRX. They're trying to make sure they're playing compositions on maps where the IGLing doesn't have to get too complex. Does this change things? They did play the Chamber alongside the Neon and Breach, which I'm like not a huge fan of. So I'm hoping that changes, but we'll see if that changes going into Champions. And now with all these micro changes throughout, that leaves them with only 7 agents they haven't played all year. So, they've been fairly open. No ISO, no Deadlock tried just yet, but they've been fairly open overall. Like, they've played some Yoru in the beginning as well, obviously on the other maps that are gone as well. But generally, playing fairly standard, playing double initiator wherever they can, similar to Genji in terms of philosophy. Now let's talk about the stylistic play of DRX. Like I mentioned, they've returned a bit to the roots. The set plays are back. The spacing, once the execute happens, etc. The protocols are there, right? DRX used to be the textbook team. That's starting to come back. But the big difference now is they have a few more rounds where they have a bit more individual freedom. Because in the past, we would notice things like when Foxy and I first joined the team, he'd be feeling it, and you could tell that he would want to go push out, and like no one would follow. And that's probably a comms issue as well. But he's just going out on his own, and then he dies. But now we're seeing, DRX actually make these plays where it's like, well, that's not the textbook play to make, right? That is not the safest choice, but it is the one that's really gonna further the snowball for you. So now they go for those, which is a big difference from the old DRX. So I think that's very, very impressive for them. And I think that's very, very enticing. The timeouts are back as well, and they seem to be very effective, so that's good. And I value Buzz as an entry player a lot, so I'm going to put that as a big plus. Now, the problems still come from the fact that, you know, this overall form of this roster is relatively new. Mako as an IGL is very new, and the mid-rounding is still a bit weak. And what I mean by the mid-rounding is, like, we've seen these games, especially coming to playoffs, where DRX comes in with a very good plan. Like, you can just notice in the first couple of rounds of, oh, they've identified this weakness for this team, and they are not going to let it go. And that's great until the opponents call a timeout. And then they figure it out. They figure out what you're doing. They say, okay, this is our next step. And then you see DRX kind of go, whoa, okay, it's not working anymore. Where do we go from here? Right? So the plans are good. The way you call that round to round is pretty good. But on the fly adjustments, you know, maybe it's a matter of depth, right? Maybe it's a matter of depth, but maybe just the mid-rounding still a bit weaker, something they need to work on. And they're still a bit reactive as well. So their spacing overall is very good when they're going for these trades, when they're going for these swings, things like that. But it's either we have a set play execute, so we're going to do this so I know exactly the spacing to take, or you're kind of waiting for contact to happen and then I can trade for you. This is different from Gen G, where they are aggressively taking space, right? They're always taking space, and that's where they're taking contact to get trades, etc. And I think Gen G's way is probably the future of Valorant, so I'm going to count this as a bit of a weakness for them. And of course, you know, the rookies, they're not as consistent as they could be yet, so especially when you're going into a tournament like Champions, I'm going to list that as a weakness. Next up, everybody's favorite dinosaurs, PRX. Let's start with the staffing here. As you'll notice, they don't have a player that's an IGL, but it's going to be their head coach, Alex. And that's because they claim that they don't have an IGL. And it's pretty clear if you listen to some of their comms or the replays or anything like that. They kind of take turns on who's calling. Maybe it depends on the map. Maybe it depends on what position you're playing around. Everyone, it's a group effort. It's a group effort here for PRX. So to me, that makes Alex the IGL because he calls the timeouts and he says, course correct. So he's the IGL for me, for PRX. And most recently, they added a second coach. I didn't think this day would come, but Bulb is now joining Alex, and they go way back. So obviously they've known each other for a while, and it does seem like this has helped the overall mood in the coaching, in the coaching booth. So that's good. You're not going to see as much death slamming anymore. I don't know if that makes you sad, but anyway, Jing has returned, and I'm just listing him as the main duelist. But quite frankly, all these guys are flex. They're all over the place, except for Mind Freak, I guess. He just plays controller, right? He just says, all right, I'll just put up smokes, and I'll clutch whenever I need to, guys. No big deal. But this is another roster where it was very hard to pick out the player to watch for. But I eventually went with Divide, and here is why. I think, for one, he's now getting as much spotlight as he should be getting. I think in the past, he was always noted by people who watched their games, but it was always kind of like the overall, mass audience. Devi was always that guy. They were like, oh yeah, Devi's really good. Or like come Champions are like, oh my gosh, Devi's actually really good. Like it was always this late realization for the overall audience, I feel. But this year, I think finally this is a year where I'm like, oh, I don't think he's being underappreciated anymore. Finally. And to me, that's a very exciting time to be watching for Devi because he's so good. He's so good. He's so sturdy. He's so stable. He really is the backbone of this team. He really is the anchor for this team, not just in the map, but overall for this team. He's starting opping a lot more again as well, which is always very exciting to see because he's one of the greater oppers for sure out here in Pacific. So overall, very fun. But the X Factor still has to be something. You could argue Jing has those moments. You could argue Forsaken has those moments. I mean, you could argue both of these guys have those moments too. But to me, something is the one that when they feel like they're at their wit's end, it's something go kill that gets activated. And if it succeeds, they win the map. Like 100%. Just 100%. It's like guaranteed. If it succeeds, they win. Like it's a guarantee. Now, it doesn't work as often as it used to just because the overall playing field has been upgraded. But to me, that's why something is going to be that guy. Doesn't matter if he's on the Jet. Doesn't matter if he's on the Breach, the Gecko, whatever it might be. If it needs to get done, he'll go and take kills. And to me, that's the guy you need to watch out for, right? So when you think you're winning, he's the guy you want to watch out for and be like, all right, just make sure the last thing you want to get caught to is something coming up and then just bulldozing through us. So it's just overall chaos. It's just overall good fun. And you could really, if you have a friend who's joining in and they're like, all right, I guess I'll follow along with PRX, you could really just name any of these players to be the one that they really focus on and they'll have a good time. For those who aren't as familiar with PRX, which I imagine overall in the world there's not too many of you anymore, PRX is known for hashtag WGaming. What does WGaming mean? Well, the W key is the key to go forward. So this is a team that never takes the foot off the pedal. They are always charging forward. And that makes for some crazy games. That makes for a lot of chaos. It also makes for some of the fastest games that we will ever have at the highest level. And it also highlights their insane mechanical skill because they're like always taking fights, and it happens so quick, and they're all good at holding angles, but also taking flicks and getting spray transfers, and it's just it turns into a bit of a frag movie. So it's a lot of fun to watch. Now, they used to have the best records out here in Pacific, getting to the grand finals twice. They unfortunately never got the trophy at an international tournament, but that's still very, very impressive. However, the current story for PRX is this the limit, right? They finally overcome DRX last year. The team that was kind of their rival out here in Asia, but always had the win. They overcome it, and then they go on a win streak against DRX. What was it? 6, 7 matches in a row. Feels like it's now the reverse. It's not a rivalry anymore. But then they've been overshadowed by Gen G. Gen G suddenly comes in, sweeps away the first international trophy for Pacific, takes down PRX. Now, just recently in the lower finals of VCT Pacific, DRX also gets their revenge in getting the reverse sweep against PRX. So the question now is this always going to be the limit of WGaming, right? You're great, but not the best. Like, is that going to be your legacy? But obviously you can tell, this is a very storied team, so I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but that's the story that I'm watching out for. Okay, so here's the fun part about PRX. You can see that 2 maps aren't even listed for their compositions here because there's a lot to discuss. But let's talk through the basics. First of all, you're going to see a lot of Rays because Jing is the main duelist here for PRX. If it's not the Rays and it's the Jet, you're oftentimes going to see the Sage coming out from Jing, and obviously that's kind of limited to which maps they're on. But overall, I don't know if you notice, but just even at a glance, these compositions are built to fight. They're built to fight. A lot of flashes, a lot of stuns, right? Rarely any traditional sentinels. Just on Haven and Icebox. But outside of that, it's about going in, taking the fight, just taking them by the collar and just bringing the fight to them. And that's just how PRX plays. Now, there are distinct maps where this doesn't work out very well. I haven't highlighted Haven because they only played it that one time. So we'll have to see if this continues, but it's been a long time since PRX is very good at Haven, so we'll have to wait and see. And you can tell they don't like playing these maps, right? They've banned it. They've banned Ascent and Haven as much as they can, so they want to avoid it. They understand that these are weak maps for them, and we'll see if that gets fixed, because to me, a big problem is the composition. 40% win rate on Ascent. You've been around for so long, right? You actually have the longest standing core, 3 or more people with, that's stuck with a team or a brand for all of VCT. And Ascent has been around since the beginning, and you're still struggling to figure this out. Barely 50% win rate on defense. That hurts, right? The attack, sure, it could be rough, but that hurts. But meanwhile, to counteract that, their Sunset, unbeatable. Nearly 90% win rate. Nearly 90% win rate out of 17 times. They pick it whenever they can. They've never banned it. They've been allowed to pick it 12 times, which is crazy. That does include the BO5s, though, so take that with a grain of salt. And their win rates on both sides of this map are insane. They've had some evolutions of their composition as well. And it's very, very impressive. But now let's talk about Ascent and Lotus. Boy, look at these changes. They have just tried everything. They've tried everything, and they still haven't really landed on it. Now, for Lotus, I think they've now found some comfort. When they finally brought out this at the playoffs of Stage 1, right, with the Breach and the Sky, and then the Jet Rays, it started to look really good. because the breach gives you a bit more extra fighting power. You don't have to use the guiding lights just to set up fights. You don't have to use the trailblazers, and now Sky can play for info, so you're not as limited in that. So you have a bit more awareness going into fights. But on top of that, the long range of things like the vault line allows Forsaken, who was playing the breach, to go on lurks, so it counteracts the lack of sentinel. And then recently they started testing the neon for Jing. His neon isn't anything to write home about. Jing's just really good at Valorant. But overall, this was exciting because now that allowed them to, try out the KO alongside the fade. So a bit heavier info with util that still allows you to fight well. And then also, what can KO do? Again, very long range flash drives for the pop flashes up in the sky, the long range 0 points, things like that, where Forsaken can have a bit more freedom to move around the map. And Jing left to be a bit more self-sufficient, even if it's only one relay bolt. So the Lotus, after some time, I feel like they've now figured out how they want to play Lotus. This isn't going to become the meta. I don't think everyone can handle this, but I think this makes it good enough for them. And 50%, eventually maybe this gets like 52%. For a team like PRX that feeds off of chaos, I think that's okay to have a couple maps that are like 52%, right? You don't have to be winning all of them 55% or more to make sure you're winning matches. But then comes the problem with Ascent. And Ascent, I mean, they've tried just as many things, actually more, because they actually swapped out the Sky for the Sova ones here. They tried the Zukop, they tried the Clove, they tried the Sage. I mean, they tried everything but the Sova KO with a Sentinel, right? So, like, they tried everything but the traditional composition. And part of this is the limitation of who plays which agents. Because while they have two of the most flexible players we've seen in Pacific, and one that's growing into it in something, Jing has a pretty hard limit on what he can play. I mean, he's expanded it now with the Clove and the Neon, but that makes it Raze, Clove, Neon, and Sage. So, and the Reyna. So it's a bit limiting in how they can shift around the roles. And I would say for Ascent, they still haven't figured it out. Because here's the thing. If you're not playing a traditional Sentinel, watching mid gets a lot harder, which means you have to push out. But Ascent is built to be better on defense because of the choke points. So pushing out of that, you're already putting yourself at risk. And if everyone else is playing double initiator, double info, they can really shut things down. And then once you're on the attack, you don't have as much info, so you can't really play the map as much. So you kind of just have to force the fights, which makes it much more apparent for the defenders to try to hold off, try to get damage on you, try to get early picks just by spraying through smokes, things like that. And I think it gets really tough. So the big question is can they remedy this? Like just make it playable, right? Just make it playable, and I think now you're okay again, because the map pool is the biggest threat to PRX. But fun fact, they've used all but two agents. They've used all but two agents, Deadlock and Chamber. I'm actually surprised that they haven't tried the Deadlock yet, but maybe we'll see that at Champions. I think, for PRX, we've talked mostly about this. If you've watched them at all, but it's what you'd expect. It's what you expect from a team that goes hyper aggressive. So they're very talented mechanically. They can create the chaos, and they can all clutch up, right? You never know what's going to happen next when it comes to PRX. And they have some pretty good timeouts. But the weakness is that their compositions are a bit all in. The win conditions are a bit more apparent and a bit more one-dimensional. It does make it tougher for them to control the map, which I think now we're really in a stage of Valorant where map control is so important. And then the overheating, the mental. Like, can you make sure you stabilize yourselves on stage, especially if you make it to a best of 5? These are the big questions for PRX to see if they can not only get back to the very top and kind of secure themselves once again as, we are still the top team or one of the top teams of Pacific, but also can they try to go for a win? Last but not least, Talon Esports, the Thai crew. Returning, well, Talon hasn't been to an international tournament, but Cruz has. So Cruz returning to an international tournament, not counting lock-in because everyone was invited. Requalifying, I should say, to an international tournament alongside a bunch of new friends. Talon being led by head coach Frost and Boy as a duo here on the coaching staff. But just to take a look at the roster, we'll talk about Primi last, but let's actually start in reverse. So Ban used to play on T1. Used to be a duelist back in the day, back when he was playing in Challengers, but on T1, he was playing Smokes, and now he's kind of the go-to Sentinel, but he flexes around a lot. This is another team that flexes very, very much. But Ban has been very consistent. I actually think he's kind of been the rock for Talon throughout this year. Meanwhile, next it's going to be Cruz, another veteran of the VCT scene. And Cruz is the go-to initiator for this team, kind of returning to that initiator role. He is also the IGL, and I give him a lot of credit for being one of my favorite IGLs out here in Pacific. I think he has some pretty good mid-round reads for Talon Esports. Next up, Jit Boys. I mean, I know I said Ban's kind of the rock, but I guess Jit Boys is the silent killer. I guess that's the other way we can put him. He's the go-to controller. That's all he plays. But boy, oh boy, like he will just quietly get those multi-kills, right? I mean, Jit Boys always holds his own. Jit Boys always holds his own. He's always good for one. So he's the reliable player. I mean, Ban to me is kind of like the rock, because also if you listen to their comms, like Ban's the one who was always like, all right, let's calm down. Like, let's focus. Right? Like, this is what we do. This is the game plan. So I give him that credit on top of his play style. But Jit Boy's also, you know, just playing controller and that one specific role. I think he has more room to just be the silent killer, the guy that does his job consistently every time. And he's very, very gosh darn good at it. Used to be the best player on Talon Esports, if you ever asked me. But now there is some competition. So we'll talk about that soon. Next up, Governor. Also hailing from Challengers America, coming in kind of as the primary duelist initially, but now he is also a flex, you know, plays some initiator, you know, plays some KO here and there. We saw him picking up the Clove. It was pretty good. Still plays the Neon for them. You know, the Neon is still his if it comes down to the duelist. And Governor has been very good. I think Governor still sometimes overheats. And now watching some of the comms videos or listening to head coach Frost talk about their players, you know, whether it's on Spike Talk or during interviews, I can start to see why. It seems like Governor has that right mindset of there's a time ticking. We have a window. We need to take this chance. It seems that he sees a moment and he wants to seize it. Haha, get it? He sees it and then he seizes it. Haha. And if you go back and watch it, the times he overheats are not necessarily bad times to overheat. It's just that his team's not with him. Obviously, at that point, you can't really blame one or the other. You just have to make it work as a team. So now giving it some time, I'm willing to take back some of the criticism I had for Governor. It's not just him being like, haha, I'm feeling it today. I'm going to go for kills and now I'm just dying and throwing the round. Like, that's not happening. It does seem to be that they're not quite in sync. And Governor maybe just has a more aggressive look at the game, right? Where he wants to make sure they're taking every opportunity. Therefore, when he's not playing the duelist, it actually seems to work out even better. I actually think Governor shines even more when he's not playing the duelist, because now you're not in a position to always do that. You don't have the self-sufficiency to always just go in and try to take that chance. But overall, again, the flexibility helps them a lot alongside Ban, so I give them a lot of credit. Last but not least, the rookie coming in, trying to become the Charon of Talon Esports. You know, comes in fresh off the plane, just got his visa, drops down into the qualifying match for Champions against Team Secret, is more or less responsible for nearly every pistol round and anti-eco. That's 8 rounds in 2 maps. And then on top of that, he has some crazy other rounds too. Clearly very mechanically gifted. And now he seems to be the go-to main duelist for this roster. So the big question is how much can he prove at Champions, being his first international event? I mean, his first full tournament, right? Because he was just dropped in for the playoffs coming into Pacific. We shall have to wait and see. But I'm very excited for this. So that's why Jit Boys is my player to watch, right? Like, he's the guy that is just doing his job in the back, but he's very, very good at it. If you're a controller player, this guy's a guy worth following. Just watch how he plays. You'll learn a lot. But meanwhile, the X Factor, as head coach Frost said, they wanted a big X Factor. They got it. It's Primi. See what he can do against the best of the best in the world. In fact, literally the best in the world, because their first match is going to be against Leviathan with Aspas on the other side. See if Primi can, hold a candle to him. I just want to give a shout out to Surf, by the way. He's now, it seems like he's now going to be just the designated 6th man on the bench, but he did so well for them throughout the year. I think he was a big part of them getting certain wins to make sure that they were in a position to make it to Champions throughout the year. You know, coming in, playing, that Sentinel role, his lurk timings were great. And also, I mean, just so pure how happy he was that they made it to Champions. So I want to give him a shout. I hope to see him play again, whether it's on Talon, wherever else it might be, just because I think he actually improved a lot from his old days when he was playing Duelist alongside Cruz back on Xerxia. Listen, they're the dark horse. They're the dark horse coming in from Pacific. They're coming in as the 4th seed. We'll take a look at their win record soon, but it's actually like the stats tell the story. They won exactly what they needed to make it to Champions. So they got that done. We'll see how far they can go now. But the big thing is Thai Valorant is returning to the international stage. It's re-qualified for the first time in a little bit. Cruz and Surf were the last ones. They were at Champions 2 years ago, and now they're here. Premi coming in as a hot rookie. We'll see what he can do. But the real thing is they're the chefs. They cook. Talon Esports cooks. You might think it's burnt, but boy, do they cook all the time, nonstop. The fire never stops in this kitchen because they are just going at it. Coach Frost is just nonstop cooking all the time. And is that enough to make them go on a run? I mean, we shall see. So right away, little slightly different numbers than we're used to seeing from our top 3 seeds, right? Overall, right below 50%. Ascent is, I mean, I just got done hammering at PRX's Ascent, but I guess Talon's looking rougher. The Icebox isn't looking too good. The Sunset's not looking too good. The Haven's not looking great. I mean, there's a lot of question marks here, but hey, they won the ones they needed to. And if you look, they've got quite some variations. They've got quite the variations going on here for the compositions. So I believe that's supposed to be a raise, by the way, in the Lotus segment here. Sorry, I don't know why I skipped that one. But as you can see, head coach Frost wasn't lying. They've always got at least 2 different compositions, if not more, per map. I mean, Bind is the only one that they have. Oh, I guess Haven. Bind and Haven, but they've only played them 3 and 2 times. So every other map, they've played 2 compositions. And they're all very different, right? So it seems like they've basically got kind of a standard composition and then a crazy one, right? You got a standard one and then a crazy one. You got a standard one and then a crazy one. So they've got some ideas. I mean, listen, I always say the criticism I give Talon is the cooking's great, but can the players handle it? But they handled it just enough to make it to Champions, so credit where credit is due. It didn't always look the cleanest, right? But hey, I mean, at least it got the job done. It's very interesting. Now, Ascent being so low, I'm actually surprised it was so low that their Ascent was looking that rough. I mean, 42%, 41% on attack and defense. But guess what? One of the big important things was that they showed off the zombie comp. This is what almost led to them winning the match overall against DRX as well. So some cool ideas with the zombie comp over here. You've got the Neon ISO over here on Haven. You got the ISO Clove, which had some legs over on Icebox. Even on these compositions, you could tell when there were some overheating moments, a little bit of mismatching maybe in the language barrier, etc. So I think the biggest thing to take away from here is first of all, okay, they do have comps like out the wazoo. They've got comps everywhere, but it's not as consistent. And I think there's some glaring weaknesses that they need to watch out for in the draft, which I'm sure they're more aware of than anybody else. The most interesting thing for me out of all of this was actually the fact that they banned Bind a decent amount, and yet they've won every time they've played it, which, it wasn't that often, but going with the Zoo comp, Gecko Sky Rays, going through the double screens. We'll see if that comes back. I would love to see what they've cooked up now. But with all this variation, they now have only 3 agents left. And in fact, this should be 2, if not 1, I believe, because Yoru was definitely played, just not in the current map pool. So they really have been going through utilizing everything the game has to offer. And I give them mad props. I love to see it. I love that style of kind of theory crafting and working the game. Lotus looks good. 70% win rate. Played 10 times. Looks real solid. They picked it 7 times whenever they had a chance. And here they've played 4 different comps, right? But variations of a raise comp, I'm just going to leave this R here, a raise comp and a neon comp, right? So 2 different variations. This one with the clove, also to kind of help with Primy coming in. He was playing the clove, but then they brought out the deadlock. So they're cooking, right? They're letting you know that they've always got something extra and you don't know what to expect. So as you can see with those compositions, as the coaching staff of Talon meant it to be, they are hard to anti-strat. You don't know which comp's coming out. You can't always prep for both compositions, and then what if a third one comes out? And now with Primy, maybe all of these compositions change. So that's going to be hard. And they're very, very flexible. A couple of their players are very flexible. They can change their comps, which means that they have very distinct win conditions each game. And I think this is some of the biggest strengths that they have, is that they can come up with these newer comps that people haven't seen in the matches that matter, right? So it's funny because while Gen G is just like winning as much as they can, Talon really has taken it to heart to say, we just need to win the matches that matter, right? We just need to win like 50% of the matches at the right time, which is true for any sport. And if you can bring out the right comps at the right time and they haven't seen it, it's going to take longer for them to identify your win condition, so you have a head start. And then even after, even if they identify it, do they always have the answer? It's going to take a couple more rounds, right? So I think that's a huge benefit that Talon has, as long as the language barrier, is diminishing, which I think it has been with Jip Boys for sure. So now it's, trying to make sure Primy fits into the team. And as long as the players can digest it fully enough. They also do really good conditioning. So what I've noticed going back and watching some of it is it's not just that Cruz has like really good mid-rounding, just like flat out vanilla mid-rounding, but it actually seems that he has really good ways, and they have really good ways prepped to condition their opponents to expect certain things, especially if they have newer comps, right? So they'll try something, and then if it's working, they'll keep doing it so that the opponents have to respect it, and then they change it, and then they change it back. So they're very good at controlling the tempo of the mental game throughout the match. And now, especially with Primy, you've got some great X Factor as well. I mean, I would say Jit Boys before that for sure, and even Ban and Governor at times, especially depending on which agent they're playing, they have their moments for sure, but I think Primy's going to be that guy to watch out for now. But I keep mentioning the language barrier. You can't escape from it if you have a multicultural team, if you have a multilingual team. That's always going to be one of the toughest parts. It's very different than just being able to like hang out versus having to calm in a high pressure situation. And then because of their unique win conditions, sometimes some compositions are not as forgiving, right? You don't have as many chances. It's not as clear to the opponent, so you should theoretically have an easier time making it work. But maybe you don't have as many chances because you're looking for specific win conditions on specific rounds or things like that. And if you miss that, now you kind of like have to fight your way through and see if it can work. And after watching the conditioning thing, it made me realize, oh, actually their reactive mid-rounding is actually not as strong. And so maybe that's something. And I think this is probably, in fact, Talon and Gen G are probably at opposite ends. Where Gen G, they're not changing comps and they're focusing on being able to react as quickly to the opponents. Whereas Talon is changing things as much as possible to throw things at the opponent to make sure you're staying a step ahead. And so I think, Gen G's perhaps is safer. I mean, obviously it's proven so far that it is safer because they're getting more wins. But I'm not going to say Talon's is bad, but there is that risk of you might be focusing too much on your own game. And I wonder if they're going to be able to fix that. This is something they've talked about as well in their interviews. So obviously they're very well aware of it. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion. And then the inconsistent firepower, not as true anymore, but I'm just leaving it on there because it has bitten them a little bit, the overheating, things like that. That was a lot. I thought I got through that pretty quickly, but I didn't. But guess what? That's because there's a lot to talk about for these teams. So these are the 4 teams that we will be following for Champions Seoul. These are what they look like. These are just the overviews of what to watch out for when you're cheering for these teams, when these teams are playing. And also in the upcoming videos where I'm analyzing their upcoming opponents, I will talk from their POV. Okay, with this, like if it's Talon, all right, you've got Talon's actually the hardest one because like I don't know what comp they're going to play, but okay, let's not do Talon. Let's do Gen G, right? So if I'm Gen G, this is what I'm good at. How do I use this to counteract my opponents, right? How do I make sure that I'm staying ahead of them or I'm reacting to them? How do I make sure I get the tells that I want? Things like that. So keep this in mind. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you weren't familiar with the Pacific teams, hope this helps a little bit, as I think there's a lot of excitement around Pacific this year, and hopefully this continues on throughout the future. But for now, that's it. This is the intro. And in the next video, we will be diving into the opening match, Gen.G versus Sentinels. What should Gen.G be looking out for? What does Gen.G need to do to get their opening match win, and get that revenge back against Sentinels and send America's home? They don't actually go home on that match, but hey, the narrative's kind of fun. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you did, please let me know down in the comments below. Even just a short word helps a lot, not just for my own feelings, but the algorithm as well. And of course, hope you guys have a great rest of your day/night. We are counting down today's Champions Seoul. I'll try to keep you guys as occupied as possible before and throughout the tournament. And I cannot wait for the matches to start. See you next time.